Okay, hi everyone. This is episode number 7, I believe, of Butcher and Barrel. Lars going to be on his way in, and I think that today we're going to be covering malting. You know, Highland Park is one of the few distilleries to still be. Is Lyle coming in? They'll be doing their own floor maltings, and so Lyle and I are going to walk through a little bit of what that is and what that looks like, and why it's important, or maybe in your opinion why it's not. Hello, mate. Every single time. I'm good. The first thing that we always do is go right in, do these big reaches.
Turn the volume up.
Yeah, that's it. I really do need to get some wireless headphones at some point. I'll get that.
Yeah, no, me too. I was thinking that last week because I could really hear what you were saying
Yeah.
last week. But,
I think last week, every time you went into the fridge, I was like still talking to you. I was like, there's no way he can hear me at this point. I'll just stop.
No, exactly. Oh, happy birthday, by the way, yesterday.
Oh, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Yes, I already said that today we were going to talk about malting. I'd kind of like sent you over a list of like, okay, what do you want to talk about? And so that's what we said we were going to go into. And so I figured I'd just start walking us through it, but I don't know if you had any questions off the top of your head ahead of time, and I'll make sure that I can try and address them. If not, then I'll just start speaking, and you can let me know when you have a question.
I think that'd probably be the best way. I have got some questions, like
Sure.
very rough ones, like
Sure.
kind of grain that we're using, that kind of stuff.
Right.
How
Sure.
long the period is.
Yeah.
Like that, why it's essential to do it. So,
Cool. All right. Well, I did want to make sure that I got my hours correct because I don't memorize how long we do certain things for by hours and temperature. So I did bring some notes with me.
Right.
But yeah, really, what we're talking about malting is we're, why are we not using, so single malt Scotch, it's always going to be 100% barley, right? It's a single malt. And it's always going to be malted barley. We kind of addressed it before pretty loosely, and I'm going to address it again very loosely. Why do we even bother the malting of barley? Because we could just take barley and do it that way. I know that there's certain enzymes that, it's a little like kernel, right? It's like a little seed. It's got husk, it's got endosperm, it's got all these things inside. When you try and kind of like make a mash from it as it is, one, the starches and the sugars which we want to ferment, right, to turn into yummy alcohol, they're not ready to go yet, so we can't really get them out. In the process, I think there's a lot of like gluons in there that make it all like sticky and slobbery, make it really difficult to get in there. So really, malting is kind of just like a controlled germination, right?
Yeah.
It's this super controlled place where we're like, right, we've got the husk, we've got the endosperm, we've got this little piece that runs between the two, and then we've got like the embryo at the front. What we want to do is break down some of the outer kind of like shell, if you like. We want to get the enzymes inside to come alive, and then they're going to start basically breaking down all of the chains in between these different like long, big, starchy carbohydrates, so that we have like basically a little packet of ready to go sugar, kind of.
Right. Okay. So that's kind of, sorry to get back onto the meat side of things, but that's kind of like the aging process, kind of similar, breaking down enzymes, that kind of way.
Yeah. I suppose it's probably more like your controlled rigor mortis process, right?
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah. Perfect.
It's almost like that. Only in this case, we're actually tricking it into life, right? Because it's been stored and like air dried at a certain temperature, so that it's dormant but still alive. Kind of like yeast, when you like leave yeast and you can obviously reinvigorate it. I think the same thing happens. These little kernels already have all of this stuff inside them, already have all of this potential. We're just wanting to bring it out. So what we do is we effectively, the first step in the process is basically this steeping where we're tricking it into coming alive. And, we both saw this at Highland Park, right? We went into that big malting room.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We've got a number of those. We've got 5. We only saw 1. And, there's these massive companies that do this professionally from start to finish, right? That's all they do, super controlled. It's all about humidity and temperature and just making sure that every single thing is like as germinated correctly, not too far, not gone past its prime. It's like all of these different things. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we get as much extractable sugar from these grains.
Yeah.
Super high tech.
Just really quickly, going back to the barley, do you harvest it as you would when you're making porridge oats? Once it's like gone to the golden age, the heads have kind of fell over.
It's like that. It's ripened, right? You're waiting for it to ripen. And then it's a really good question. All that I do know about like how that side of it works is that we have these long-term relationships with a number of farmers, right? This happens in tequila a lot as well, that some relationships are like, okay, I need stuff this year, I go and I buy it. The good thing about that is that you can probably be a bit aggressive with your pricing, but it's a little bit like, well, it's probably not so great for the farmers. And then if it's a bad yielding year and they don't have a contract with anyone, then they're in trouble. And if everyone's offering them undervalue, but the risk is, right, that 1 year when it's like you're the one that's got all the crop, you can charge what you want, they can make big. We try and take like a long-term like look at this. So we typically have like, you know, longer contracts where we'll offer above an average price over a long period of time, and then that way they know what's going on. But it means that they also know what we really want, so we can actually work together to get the type of grains we want. And we're typically using concerto, which is a pretty typical, you know, type of barley, but we do use a little bit of barley from the island, from like it's an Orcadian barley called tartan as well. We use that in Valknut, one of our like limited yearly releases, which is just like a different strain, different species. But you know, like barley, like to give you an idea, like 100 years ago, you'd maybe get like 300 liters a ton, like 300 liters of alcohol out of 1 ton of barley.
Right.
Roll forwards to today, we're getting closer to like 450 liters out of a ton, like a 50% increase. That's just by choosing the species of the barley. We want to make sure that it has certain compounds inside, and we don't want other things. And over time, you know, you use concerto, you use momentum, you use 2 rows, 6 rows, you use all these different types of barley. It's about getting to this end game where we're like, right, what is it that we want and what is it that we need, right?
Yeah. No, sure.
So, you know, we're at that stage now where now we know what it is that we want. And so at Highland Park, you know, you've seen what it looks like again. I mean, it's a big room. The height of technology is, we didn't see them, but there's little thermometers dotted about on the floor.
They like poke it into the actual.
Yeah, just poke it in. Kind of. It's been steeped and it just gets spread out, right? And during this time, you need to like make sure that it's turning. It takes about 7 days, and you need to make sure that it's turned every 8 hours, morning, night, whenever it is. Yeah. You think of these big commercial maltsters, they've basically got these massive drums that check humidity, temperature, everything, make sure the oxygen content and the CO2 content is going crazy. What we've got is a big room with some guys that go down with these big shields and just like turn it over by hand. And they have one machine that I don't think we saw, but I've seen it. And it looks like almost like some mini skis that go around, almost like a combine harvester almost, that basically turns it. But that thing looks like you need, like, that looks kind of just as much backbreaking work as doing it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And so what we have, you know, if it gets too warm, what we do is we open the windows. Like that's the height of technology, you know. In the middle of summer, you know, it was still nippy. It was like when we were there, it was great, but it was still cool. So it gets too warm, we just open the windows. That's how we've been doing it for a long time, pretty much since we started. Nice. And it's really rare that people still do that.
Yeah, nice. So going back to like the industrial revolution of like what you were saying with big machines, all the humidity controlled and stuff. Would someone who's doing like a regular, consistent product, they want the same thing over again, would go for that as opposed to Highland Park that goes, oh, this is a 12-year of this, and it gives you more variables, you know? It makes the whiskey taste different or not?
Well, so what I'd say is like, so first off, yeah, you're absolutely right. The consistency, the level of like scientific consistency that you're definitely going to get from that is a truth, right? We're not going to achieve that at Highland Park. You know, there's going to be variations. We you know, but one thing that isn't a variation is that we've been doing this for a long time. We keep on doing this. If we changed all of our malt to one of these commercial guys, like, yeah, they could replicate exactly what we want and it would be the same every single time. But handing that over is in of itself kind of like a change in how we do things. Yeah. So, you know, you pick your poison in this situation, right? It's, you know, there's a romance to this, but absolutely, of course, the scientific side. Now, the truth is, it's incredibly important how you malt. But it is an earlier stage in the process. We're yet to, you know, peat it. We're yet to kiln it, well, which is the peating. We're yet to mill it. We're yet to turn it into a wash, and we're yet to distill it, and then we're yet to age it, and for how long? So it's so early on in the process, it's important, but it's gonna, you know, there's so many more steps that are coming afterwards that are going to really change that flavor. And the truth is that, you know, when we go to make, so I pulled this out today, actually. I pulled out the new make spirit.
Ah, nice. Right.
Yeah. I mean, this is being dialed down to like 50%. It's not this, because we distilled to around about 69.8, I think it is. If it was any higher, then it would be like legally a different, like a dangerous good, basically. It'd be explosive, right? I mean, it already is. So you can really smell a lot of like the just like biscuity, almost like a Scottish like shortbread or something, like biscuity, banana-y at times, cereal-esque thing. By the time that it's hit oak, you know, by the time we go to make, like you said, 12-year, even our like regular 12-year, it's a mixture of so many different casks to make sure that the color, the smell, the flavor, everything is the same as the previous batch. That, again, you know, the more variables are inevitable. We can't help it. Right? We can't help it when working with wood. The more variables there are earlier on, just gives us potentially more variables later on from with which to blend to make sure that we make a consistent thing. Because even if we could, by some miracle, take the same grain, duplicate it 50 billion times, and so now we're making whiskey with the exact same grain. I mean, like science fiction replicated thing, you know. By the time that we go to put all of that whiskey into seemingly identical barrels, they're going to produce very different whiskeys. I heard yesterday Martin Markbertson was talking about one of the single casks, I think, that came to the States, which I think is a 10-year. I think it was a 10-year he was talking about. And this 10-year whiskey, bottled, it had gone from 69.8 down to 66%, which is ludicrously small loss of alcohol. Like 1% is what we typically quote for us. But this one cask had lost like 3% over the course of 10 years. It's magic. It happens. We can't control it. We don't want to control it. We'd love to understand it a bit better. But at the end of the day, you know, that's when it comes down to like Gordon and Gordon Motion's whiskey making team doing what they do. So yes, like if we had that different, consistent, you know, big maltster product brought into us, and that was all we used, and don't forget, like only 20% of what we use we're malting ourselves. We are still buying that as well, right? We are buying that, like that stuff I just described. We're buying that controlled stuff in. But this other 20%, the one which we're effectively, everything that we're malting is being funneled through to our kilns to be peated, right? So the nice thing for us is that when it's coming in and when we have the control, you know, we've been able to actually use a lot less of our peat because of our malting process now, where we've made decisions to say like, okay, if the humidity's increased a little bit, or we germinate thus far or malt thus far, but retain more moisture content than perhaps if we had it shipped into us, where it would continue to lose it, it would continue to change in transport, right? I mean, we've got some journey to get there. It's probably going to be coming by boat. Instead, we can get the exact humidity we want and then send it straight to that upper tier where the smoke's going to come through, the peat's going to come through. The higher humidity, the more the peat is going to stick to the grains. Like if it's brought down to like super low percent, it doesn't stick on there, which is great because peat, I mean, peat's it's a fossil fuel. It's replenishing very, very slowly. We always use less than we need to, but that control of doing it ourselves gives us that one extra step to be like, okay, we can even use less peat and get the same amount of like, you know, ppm or phenols in there if we do it this way. So that's another thing that it does really. So really it's, you know, malting is really just controlled germination and trying to make sure that we produce as many of the enzymes as we can without killing them or damaging them so that they can do their work, and just cutting through all of these different chains to then produce basically fermentable sugars. It's already all in there. We're just, you know, we get to make choices about it. Doing it ourselves on the floor? No, of course it's not as controlled.
Okay, but let's go back and you just do us I won't interrupt this time. Just do like a step-by-step thing of from when the grain comes in,
right,
to when it goes into the mash
right,
tin. Like do a step-by-step guide of like, do they spray it down to get it to germinate?
Yeah. So it's going to be steeped for like 2 days, for about 48 hours, right? So that's where it's kind of going into this warm water because you're looking to hydrate the grains, right? Often once it's been harvested, it gets dried. Usually you clean it. A lot of people like to clean it after drying because if you try and clean it before, it's kind of just messy and a pain. So it usually gets dried by whoever it was that was, you know, is storing it to ship to us, and it will get cleaned. When we receive it, we need to kind of like reawaken it from that dormancy. So we're basically going to steep it for like 48 hours, and then it gets spread about 2 to 3 inches over these big malting floors, of which we have about 5, of which not about 5, we have 5. And then at that point, it's, you know, it's got this liquid content. This heat is starting to build up inside of it because it's going through all of these enzymatic processes. It's breathing during that time, right? It's taking in and letting out. So we need a team on our production facility at around about 20 people. Like down the road, Scott has 5 people in the production team. We need 20. Part of the reason for that is that when we're malting, we have to go down over the course of about a week. We have to, every 8 hours, we have to keep turning this malt by hand, right? That's to make sure that we're losing a bit of moisture, the heat's not building up too high. Again, height of technology, we have windows that we open or shut if it gets too warm or too cold. I wouldn't say it doesn't really play a flavor factor for me, but it is there. It is a reality that there's a lot of wind on Orkney. It is a reality that there's going to be salt in the air in Orkney. Opening the windows, you are going to get some salt air coming into the barley part, but I think you're probably getting more. You're getting more of that in the aging side, but it is going to be still there. It's worth knowing. Yeah. After that point, once it's sufficiently germinated, and at that point, I mean, you remember when you were there, it's like basically put out a sprout, right?
Yeah.
And so we're really calling it like green malt. We're happy with the germination or the malting process, and we know that we're ready to dry this. At that point, we'll take that up on a conveyor belt or this lift to the top floor, which goes above our 2 peat kilns. You know, we have one which is like 107 years old, one that's like 96 years old, that ballpark. The older one might be older than that. Anyway, and then that's where we do the peating, right? So we'll put it on peat for a while, which is the thing. Then we'll go on to coke. And actually, that would be a good thing to talk about. We should talk about, did we cover peat yet? We did cover peat.
Yeah, we did cover peat, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it goes on to peat, and then it goes on to coke, which is basically like coal with all of the impurities taken out. So you get no smoke, you get none of the like blackness and like, you know, just like impurities in the air to finish that process. That process is obviously the smoke is both continuing to dry the grain further, as well as then get it saturated with all of this peat reek. Yeah, at which point we can go.
Is that smoke like a 12-hour smoke, or is it like just a quick 2-hour, or do you not know? Or?
Yeah, it can vary. Well, it's typically we might have like over the period of like 18 hours, it will be on peat. I've seen lower numbers like 10 hours, and I've seen high numbers like 18 hours of being on peat for that amount of time. Then you'll see the notes of like what temperature I think the grain was upstairs, and then you'll see the coke will be put in towards the end because it burns a lot hotter, a lot cleaner, whereas that peat smolders. That really raises the temperature, and that secondary part is really just about, right, finish it, dry it, right? Yeah. Stops the germination further. We've already got that sprout coming out. We've already converted the sugars. We don't want to cook it because we want to dry it, right? Because now what we do is we take it, we throw it through the Porteous mill, which will basically turn it into this grist, which is basically like almost like the steel cut oatmeal part, right? And even at that part, you'll almost find like it feels more like there's soluble sugars in it now. Whereas if you put it through that mill just being dried, it would just be this gluey, mashy kind of like you can imagine if you added water to it, you'd probably just have flour, and it would be like a dough, right?
Yeah, like a
paint glue.
Kind of thing,
Loose, yeah, exactly. We don't really want that for the next part. Yeah. Then of course, what we'll do is we'll mash it. When we get to that mashing process, right? We're basically re-adding, you know, water into this point to get the wort. There, we're really concerned about just getting those sugars out. That's really just about adding water to get the sugary, you know, that sugary liquid out that the sugar out, and now in a liquid that we've produced. At which point, then it gets, you know, skipped over to the washback. Those, you know, those big wooden washbacks where we saw the guy cleaning out that one or trying to fix the leak. Yeah. It'll go into those guys. The yeast gets added, it ferments, and then, you know, distill, blah 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 blah. But you know, you mentioned like the mash tun. That's another part, because despite when it's being kilned, and despite then when it's being milled, and then when it goes into the mash tun, actually that malting process, the germinating, is really important again for the enzymes, because those enzymes are the things that again are still going to be present when we get to the mashing. So we produce these things that can continue to like facilitate the breaking down, the release of those sugars, and then they're still going to be present by the time that we go to start adding the alcohol. But the second that alcohol, you know, the second that the yeast starts converting to alcohol, things die pretty quickly in alcohol. I mean, at lower levels they can survive, but you know, like yeast itself dies at a certain point as well. So that's kind of where it fits in. And that's it.
Just a quick one on smoking kind of thing, like
It's bad for your health.
that smoke adds colour to it, because the smoke won't add any colour to the
No.
Like, a lot of people think smoke, it's going to turn orangey kind of thing.
Oh, right.
But
yeah,
it's
no.
not. You get the colour from the barrels, don't you? You get the
Yeah.
drawn
So,
out.
like, prime example right here, like this is peated. This is like 20% of this is peated malt. It's crystal clear.
Yeah.
It's crystal clear because it's not going into the cask. Again, at Highland Park, we don't add any caramel colouring. It is a very typical practice. A lot of people will add colouring, just because, again, there's so many inconsistencies in barrels. It doesn't make the whiskey better or worse. I prefer not having it there because it's just, I think it's something that doesn't need to be sustained at this point. Other people make beautiful 10-year-olds that are incredibly pale.
Yeah.
Adding a pile of dark colouring into it doesn't make a difference.
No.
Like I've found that my probably admittedly cheap balsamic vinegar has pretty much the same caramel colouring that I see people putting into. Right.
It's an aesthetics kind of thing.
It's an aesthetic, it's a consumer perception thing, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the smoke isn't going to add anything to it. By the time that we, when we
it does the flavour though.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you remember when we were watching it ferment? I mean, the smoke is going onto the grain, right? So maybe it's putting a bit of colour onto the grain so that maybe when you make the mash, maybe it's going to be a little bit, when we looked at it when it's fermenting, you can see how cloudy it is. You remember when they pull out the beer that we can have a quick look at? That wash is very cloudy, it's very murky, and it is a little bit dark. It's going to be that colour anyway because it's barley. I mean, barley's not, it's not coming out like diamonds, like sugar diamonds are coming out of this thing and we're fermenting with that. If we were, we'd just get some sugar cane and make rum, but
right.
Yeah.
But no, nice.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So that's what malting is. Malting is basically controlled germination to get everything that we want. And the simpler version of that is we're basically taking like fresh barley after then drying it and then doing a controlled first process of growth and transition to get the sugars we want. We're just going to take the potential of it becoming barley again and instead turn it into a sugar packet for us.
Yeah. Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Sweet. So just one question that's popped into my mind. Sorry,
really
quick. How important is it for Highland Park? You said about using local people and things.
Yeah.
Are you just using UK barley, or are you buying stuff
Yeah.
in from mainland Europe? Are you buying stuff from America?
No. It's so we get stuff coming in from Simpsons, which are based up in like the Tweed Valley. So we're getting typically from the north and from obviously the lowlands of Scotland. On Orkney, I mean, you remember all of those waving fields of barley when we were in Orkney? Remember seeing those everywhere?
Yeah.
There's not really a whole lot.
Sarcasm, there wasn't any. So,
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of barley on Orkney. There's a few little pockets of it being grown. Again, we get that Orcadium tartan barley that we've used before. It's far more like pastoral land. And again, like it would be great if we found a way to get some Orcadian beef down for a thing. That would be so much fun.
That would be amazing. Yeah.
Maybe.
Anyway, that's another.
Once all of this is lifted, I'll have to find a time that we can come out. And we'll have to do we'll get a chef, we'll do like a whiskey pairing dinner with Orcadian beef with some Highland Park, and we'll find like a local restaurant too. I think it'd be so much fun. So it is super important. The realities of island living is that there's limitations to what we have access to on the island. The the trees aren't from Orkney, there's no trees, so we're getting casks from there. What we're reliant upon is the spirit and soul of the people that live there, because otherwise they'd say, can we just buy this pre-malted, please, and probably pre-peated, please, instead of doing this ourselves. It's a lot of back-breaking work. But that again is
the charm of it, though.
It is, and it's part of our history. It's part of our heritage. It really is a part of it's again the malting process and doing it yourself. When I spoke to Marie Stanton, who's the distillery manager, she was saying like, yes, of course, we can get them all controlled, and it'll be exactly what we want within like real minute quality. But it's not what we do. It's not what we've done, and we feel like it is an integral part of what makes us who we are and the way in which we do things. Even if it ends up just being a romance, it is a reality that happened at the distillery, and there's very few distilleries these days that do that. So when you combine the fact that not only do we malt ourselves, and again only 20%, but that we also peat ourselves as well, it's it's just these two extra steps and parts of the process that when we change them, it will make flavor changes on the other side. Yeah. Could we still, with what's produced, make Highland Park taste like Highland Park? Yeah, probably. I'm sure Gordon Motion, if we change some of like minor tweaks, could rectify by changing how the stills are being used, or we could rectify by changing how we're aging, where we're aging, or even the fill strength of the cask. But something changes in what's inherent in the liquid, right? Like we've changed the story, we've changed what it is. And so that's why we don't do it. Or more to the point, that's why we still do it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
No, it's good. It's
and that's malting. I think we should, yeah, we'll leave it there. As always, if there's ever any questions, you can catch us, Lyle at Southeast Butcher, myself at Whiskey Darcy. This video will live on at Whiskey Darcy. If you want to see butchery videos, you want to see Lyle breaking down into a forequarter and getting down to a rib and then down to a ribeye, do go onto his page and check that out. That was really cool last week. And any thoughts, questions, or things you'd like to hear about either Highland Park, about single malt whiskey, or about butchery? We've pretty much just talked about beef thus far, so maybe it's time that we
move on to something different.
Move on to something different, and then come back to that forequarter again and continue down with that. But do reach out to us, let us know, and until next time, we shall catch you later. Thanks, mate.
Nice.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. See you, mate.
See you later.